The battlefield stank of blood and betrayal. A crimson haze choking the air as I, Elias Thornton, slipped through the chaos in a dress that clung to my skin like a lie. My heart thundered not from fear of the Confederate guns roaring nearby, but from the weight of the secret I carried. I was no concubine, but the Marquis of Willow Creek, reborn in this wretched disguise to infiltrate the enemy's heart. General Caleb Harrow, the man who'd burned my family's estate to ash, stood mere feet away, his cold eyes raking over me with disdain, unaware that the woman he loathed was his greatest foe. It was 1863, and the Civil War had carved America into jagged halves. I'd been a soldier once, a Marquis leading men to their deaths with honor, until a musket ball tore through my chest at Antietam. I should have died. Instead, I woke in this strange body, draped in silk and shame, my mind intact, but my identity erased. The universe, or some cruel god, had thrust me into the role of Lila, a concubine gifted to General Harrow by his men to ease his burdens. They didn't know I'd chosen this path not to serve, but to destroy him from within. Caleb's tent was a fortress of canvas and arrogance, lit by flickering lanterns that cast shadows like specters. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, with a face chiseled by war and loss, his dark hair streaked with premature gray. At 25, he was younger than I'd expected, but his eyes held a hardness that made my skin crawl. Lila, he spat my name like poison. You're a distraction I don't need. Stay out of my way. His voice was a low growl, but I caught the flicker of something else, pain, perhaps, or guilt. It unnerved me. I bowed my head, playing the part of the submissive concubine, but my mind raced. I'd spent weeks studying him, learning his routines, his weaknesses. Caleb was a brilliant strategist, but his men whispered of a man haunted by his own victories. He drank alone at night, wrote letters he never sent, and avoided mirrors as if they accused him. I needed to know why. If I could unravel his soul, I could break him. The first night in his camp, I slipped into his tent while he slept, my bare feet silent on the dirt floor. His desk was a mess of maps and coded messages, and I memorized what I could before his stirring forced me to flee. But as I retreated, my eyes caught a locket on his bedside, a woman's face inside, her features soft yet familiar. My sister, Abigail. My breath caught. How did he have her locket? Rage surged, but I forced it down. This was no time for emotion. I had a war to win. Days bled into weeks, and the camp became my prison. The soldiers leered, their crude jests a constant reminder of my disguise. I endured it, weaving lies to keep them at bay, all while watching Caleb. He was a paradox, ruthless in battle, yet gentle with the wounded, his hands steady as he bandaged a boy no older than 16. I hated how his kindness confused me. I hated how his gaze lingered on me sometimes, not with desire, but with something I couldn't name. One night, a storm battered the camp, rain pounding the tents like gunfire. Caleb summoned me, his voice sharp through the downpour. Lila, bring me the maps from my desk. I obeyed, my heart pounding as I entered his tent, the air thick with tension. He was drunk, his eyes glassy, the locket dangling from his fingers. You remind me of someone, he muttered, his voice raw. Someone I failed. I froze. Was he talking about Abigail? My hand itched to snatch the locket, but I held back. Instead, I sat across from him, my voice soft. Who was she? General. He laughed, a bitter sound. Not your business, girl. But his eyes betrayed him grief, raw and unguarded. For a moment, I saw not the monster who'd raised my home, but a man drowning in regret. I leaned closer, my disguise a weapon now. You can tell me, I whispered. I'm no one. And that was the truth he believed, the lie that would undo him. Caleb's fingers tightened around the locket, his knuckles white. "No one," he echoed, his voice a blade cutting through the storm's roar. I held his gaze, my pulse racing as I balanced on the edge of discovery, knowing one wrong word could unravel everything. The tent felt smaller, the air heavy with the scent of whiskey and wet canvas. I needed to push him, to pry open the wound he guarded so fiercely. "You wear her locket like a chain," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "Was she your sister? Your lover?" The words were a gamble, but I needed to know why Abigail's face haunted him. He stood abruptly, swaying slightly, and I thought he'd strike me. Instead, he turned to the tent's entrance, staring into the rain. "She was everything," he said, so softly I almost missed it. "And I destroyed her." My blood ran cold. Abigail had died in the fire that consumed Willow Creek, his fire. I wanted to scream, to drive the knife hidden in my sleeve into his heart. But I needed answers first. I rose, moving closer, my dress brushing against the dirt floor. "You didn't mean to," I said, feigning sympathy. "War takes everything." His head snapped toward me, eyes searching mine as if he could see through the disguise. For a moment, I feared he did. But then he sank back into his chair, defeated. "You don't know what I've done, Lila." I didn't. Not fully. But I was learning. Over the next weeks, I became his shadow, fetching ink, mending his uniforms, listening to his muttered orders. The camp buzzed with rumors of a Union counterattack, and Caleb's paranoia grew. He trusted no one, not even his lieutenants, but he began to tolerate me. I was Lila, the quiet concubine who asked no questions, who poured his whiskey and vanished into the background. It was humiliating, but it gave me access. I stole glances at his maps, memorized troop movements, and sent coded messages to Union spies through a washerwoman who didn't know my true identity. Yet Caleb's grief was a puzzle I couldn't solve. Late at night, when the camp slept, I'd catch him staring at the locket, whispering apologies to Abigail's image. My sister had been fierce, a poet who loved too deeply, and I'd failed to protect her. Now, her memory was my only anchor in this charade. I began to wonder if Caleb's guilt could be a weapon if I could turn his own heart against him. One evening, as I delivered his supper, he grabbed my wrist, his grip firm but not cruel. "Why do you stay, Lila?" he asked, his voice low. "You could run. I wouldn't stop you." I froze, my mind scrambling. Did he suspect me? Or was this another crack in his armor? I met his gaze, letting my eyes soften. "Because I have nowhere else to go," I lied. It was a half-truth. Elias Thornton had a purpose, but Lila was a ghost. His hand lingered, his thumb brushing my wrist, and I felt a jolt I couldn't explain. Not attraction, never that, but a flicker of understanding. He was as trapped as I was, bound by war and secrets. I pulled away, heart pounding, and fled into the night. Outside, I leaned against a tree, gasping, the weight of my double life crushing me. I was Elias, the Marquis, but Lila was becoming real, her emotions bleeding into mine. I hated Caleb, but I pitied him too, and that was dangerous. The camp's tension broke when a Union raid hit at dawn. Cannon fire tore through the morning, and I saw my chance. While Caleb rallied his men, I slipped into his tent, searching for the cipher that could unlock his battle plans. My fingers brushed a hidden compartment in his desk, revealing a letter addressed to Abigail. My hands shook as I read. "I didn't know it was your home. I didn't know you were there." My vision blurred with tears. He hadn't just burned Willow Creek, loved her. The letter trembled in my hands. Abigail's name a wound reopened. Caleb had loved her, and his love had killed her. The realization twisted my hatred into something sharper, More despertia need not just to destroy him, but to understand the man who'd torn my world apart. The raid's chaos masked my theft. I tucked the letter into my dress and fled the tent, blending into the panic as soldiers scrambled to defend the camp. Smoke stung my eyes, but I moved with purpose, slipping the letter to the washerwoman with a whispered instruction: "Get this to the Union." If Caleb's guilt was real, it could fracture his resolve, giving my allies the edge they needed. Back in my role as Lila, I tended to the wounded, my hands steady despite the storm in my mind. Caleb fought like a man possessed, his sword flashing in the dawn light, but his eyes were wild, haunted. When the raid ended, the camp was a graveyard of broken tents and bodies. He found me bandaging a soldier, his face streaked with soot. "You're still here," he said, almost surprised. I nodded, my voice soft. "I told you, I have nowhere else to go." That night, he called me to his tent again. The air was thick with the stench of blood and defeat. He sat at his desk, the locket open before him, Abigail's face staring up like an accusation. "You're different," he said, his voice rough. "You don't flinch at death." I swallowed, my disguise teetering. "I've seen worse," I said, and it wasn't a lie. I'd seen my own death, my family's ruin, all because of him. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, pushing one toward me. "Drink," he ordered. I hesitated, then sipped, the burn grounding me. He watched me closely, as if searching for cracks in my facade. "Tell me about yourself, Lila. Where are you from?" My heart raced. I spun a story of a small Virginia town, a dead family, a life erased by war close enough to the truth to sound real, far enough to protect me. He listened, his gaze never leaving mine, and I wondered if he saw Elias in my eyes. As weeks passed, the camp moved south, chasing rumors of a Union stronghold. I played my part, but Caleb's attention grew heavier. He sought me out, not for pleasure, but for conversation, his words laced with a vulnerability that unnerved me. He spoke of his childhood in Georgia, of a sister he'd lost to fever, of a war he no longer believed in. I listened, torn between pity and purpose, my hatred fraying at the edges. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, he found me outside my tent. "Lila," he said, his voice soft, "you make me want to be better." My breath caught. This was no Gamia was falling for the lie. For me. I should have rejoiced. It was the leverage I needed. Instead, I felt a pang of guilt. Elias wanted revenge, but Lila was beginning to care, and the clash between them threatened to tear me apart. The turning point came during a skirmish. A Union sniper's bullet grazed Caleb's arm, and I dragged him behind a barricade, my hands shaking as I bound the wound. His eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, the war vanished. "Why do you care?" he whispered. I couldn't answer, not as Lila, not as Elias. I turned away, my heart a battlefield of its own. Blood soaked my hands as I tied the bandage, Caleb's pulse steady beneath my fingers. His question, "Why do you care?" hung in the air, unanswered, as cannon fire roared in the distance. I couldn't tell him the truth, that I cared because I needed him alive, needed his trust to destroy him. The skirmish ended with the Confederates retreating, and Caleb leaned on me as we staggered back to camp. His weight was heavy, his breath ragged, but his eyes never left me. "You're no ordinary woman, Lila," he said, his voice low. I forced a smile, my disguise a tightening noose. "I'm just trying to survive," I said, and he nodded, as if he understood. In the days that followed, Caleb kept me close, his suspicion replaced by a reluctant trust. He shared fragments of his plans, unaware I was feeding them to the Union through coded messages. But each secret I stole came at a cost. His kindness, his damnable humanity chipped away at my resolve. He'd stop to help a limping horse, share his rations with starving soldiers. And once, when a child wandered into camp, he knelt to comfort her, his voice soft as a lullaby. I hated how it made me see him, not as a monster, but as a man. My own heart was betraying me. Late at night, when I lay in my tent, Elias and Lila warred within me. Elias remembered Abigail's laugh, her poems, the way she'd dance in the fields of Willow Creek. Lila saw Caleb's grief, his guilt, the way his hands trembled when he spoke her name. I was unraveling, my purpose blurring with emotions I couldn't control. One evening, as I mended his coat, he sat beside me, closer than ever. "Lila," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I don't deserve you." My needle stilled. He reached for my hand, his touch gentle, and I felt a spark I couldn't deny. It wasn't love not yet, but it was something dangerous, something that made me question who I was becoming. I pulled away, muttering an excuse, and fled into the night, my chest tight with panic. The war pressed on, and so did my mission. I uncovered a plan for a Confederate ambush, a strike that could cripple the Union's eastern front. I passed the details to my contact, but the victory felt hollow. Caleb's trust was my weapon, but his vulnerability was my weakness. When he caught me slipping a note to the washerwoman, his eyes darkened. "What are you hiding, Lila?" he asked, his voice cold. I lied, spinning a tale of a letter to a lost friend, but his suspicion lingered. That night, I overheard him with his lieutenants, questioning my loyalty. "She's too clever," he said. "Watch her." My time was running out. I needed to act before he uncovered the truth. The next day, he called me to his tent, his face unreadable. "I found this," he said, holding up a scrap of my coded message. My heart stopped. "Explain it." I opened my mouth, scrambling for a lie, but his eyes held mine, and I saw something new: hope, mixed with fear. He wanted me to be innocent. And God help me, part of me wanted to be. The scrap of paper in Caleb's hand was a death sentence, its coded symbols glaring like evidence of my betrayal. "Explain it," he repeated, his voice steady but laced with a plea, as if he wanted me to prove him wrong. My mind raced, torn between the Marquis who'd sworn to ruin him and the concubine who'd begun to feel the weight of his gaze. It's nothing," I stammered, my voice faltering under his scrutiny. "Just a note to a friend, a silly cipher from childhood." The lie was weak, and his eyes narrowed, searching mine for the truth. I held my breath, praying he'd believe me, praying I could escape this moment without shattering everything. He stepped closer, the tense shadows swallowing us. "You're lying," he said, but there was no anger, only a quiet sadness. "I want to trust you, Lila, but you're hiding something." My heart pounded, and for a fleeting second, I considered telling him everything: Elias, the Marquis, the mission. But I couldn't. Not when Abigail's locket still hung around his neck, a reminder of his sin. Instead, I softened my gaze, leaning into Lila's fragility. "I'm just a woman caught in a war," I whispered. "What could I possibly hide?" He stared at me, his jaw tight, then let the paper fall to the ground. "Don't make a fool of me," he said, turning away. I exhaled, my hands trembling, but the danger wasn't over. He was watching me now, and I had to be flawless. The camp moved again, deeper into Confederate territory, and the war grew bloodier. I continued my espionage, each message a step closer to Caleb's downfall, but my resolve wavered. He began to confide in me, sharing fears he hid from his men. "This war's a curse," he said one night, his voice raw. "It turns men into monsters." I wanted to scream that he was the monster, but the words stuck in my throat. His guilt was real, and it mirrored my own. One evening, as I poured his whiskey, he caught my hand, his touch warm. "Lila, if we survive this, I want." He trailed off, his eyes searching mine. My breath hitched. He was falling for me, and I was letting him, despite everything. I pulled away, muttering about duties, but his gaze followed me, heavy with unspoken promises. The breaking point came during a raid. Union forces struck at midnight, guided by my intelligence. The camp erupted in chaos, and I saw Caleb fighting, his sword flashing in the moonlight. A soldier lunged at him, and without thinking, I shoved the man aside, saving Caleb's life. He stared at me, shocked, as I stood there, trembling, my disguise nearly slipping. "Why?" he whispered, echoing his question from before. I couldn't answer, not when my own heart was betraying me. I fled into the chaos, my mind a storm of guilt and desire. Elias wanted revenge, but Lila wanted something else, something impossible. As the battle raged, I realized I was no longer just playing a role. I was becoming someone new, someone who loved and hated in equal measure. The battlefield was a graveyard of screams and smoke, but all I could see was Caleb's face, etched with shock as I stood between him and death. I'd saved him, the enemy. My target, and the weight of that choice crushed me. Elias screamed for vengeance, but Lila, the woman I'd become, was drowning in something deeper, something I refused to name. I fled into the night, my dress torn, my heart a traitor. The raid had been my doing, a calculated strike to weaken Caleb's forces, but saving him was an impulse I couldn't explain. As I hid among the supply wagons, my breath ragged, I heard his voice calling, "Lila." It was desperate, raw, and it tore at me. I pressed myself against the wood, praying he wouldn't find me, praying I could still be the Marquis who'd sworn to destroy him. But he did find me. His silhouette loomed in the moonlight, blood streaking his face, his eyes wild with something I couldn't read. "You saved me," he said, his voice breaking. "Why?" I opened my mouth, but no lie came. Instead, I whispered, "Because I couldn't let you die." It was the truth, and it terrified me. He stepped closer, his hand reaching for mine, and I didn't pull away. "Lila," he said, "I don't understand you, but I need you." My heart stopped. This was the moment I'd planned for his trust, his vulnerability, but it felt like a betrayal of myself. I let him pull me close, his warmth a stark contrast to the cold night, and for a moment, I forgot who I was. The days that followed were a blur of war and secrets. Caleb kept me by his side, his trust a fragile thread I both cherished and feared. I continued my espionage, but each message I sent felt like a betrayal, not of him, but of the part of me that was falling for him. His touch, his quiet confessions, the way he looked at me like I was his salvation, it was undoing me. One night, as we sat by a dying fire, he opened the locket, his fingers trembling. "Her name was Abigail," he said, his voice barely audible. "I loved her, and I killed her." My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to listen. I didn't know her home was in the path of my orders. I didn't know until it was too late. Tears glistened in his eyes, and I hated how they mirrored my own. I wanted to scream that she was my sister, that his love didn't absolve him, but I couldn't. Instead, I touched his hand, my voice soft. "She'd forgive you," I said, and it was a lie that broke me. Lila was speaking, not Elias, and I didn't know how to stop her. The war closed in, and so did my deadline. The Union was planning a final strike, and I had to deliver Caleb's plans. But as I slipped into his tent to steal them, he caught me, his eyes dark with betrayal. "Lila," he said, his voice a knife, "who are you?" Caleb's question hung like a noose, his eyes boring into mine as I stood frozen, his battle plans clutched in my trembling hands. "Who are you?" he repeated, his voice a mix of pain and fury, the locket glinting at his throat like a silent witness. I was trapped, my disguise unraveling. And the truth, Elias. The Marquis. Abigail's brother was a confession I couldn't make. "I'm Lila," I said, my voice barely steady, clinging to the lie even as it crumbled. He stepped closer, his hand snatching the papers from me, his gaze never leaving mine. "No," he said, "you're more than that. These codes, you're a spy." My heart pounded, but I saw the conflict in his eyes. She didn't want to believe it. "Not yet." I seized the moment, letting tears spill, playing the part of the desperate concubine. I had no choice. I whispered. "They forced me, threatened me. I'm nothing. Caleb, just a woman trying to survive." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he'd call for his men. Instead, he grabbed my shoulders, his touch firm but not cruel. "Tell me the truth," he said, his voice breaking. "Please." I couldn't. Not when Abigail's memory burned in my chest. Not when my mission was so close to completion. But his plea, his need for me to be innocent, tore at me. I leaned into him, my forehead against his chest, and whispered, "I'm sorry." It was all I could give him, a half-truth that meant nothing and everything. He let me go, stepping back, his face a mask of torment. "Get out," he said, his voice hollow. I fled, my heart splintering, knowing I'd just lost something I couldn't name. The camp was quiet, the soldiers unaware of the storm brewing in their general's tent. I sent the plans to the Union, sealing Caleb's fate, but the victory tasted like ash. The final days were a descent into chaos. The Union's attack was imminent, and Caleb's paranoia consumed him. He avoided me, his eyes cold when they met mine, but he didn't expose me. I didn't know why. Part of me hoped it was love. Part of me feared it was a trap. I moved through the camp like a ghost, my dual identities at war, Elias, driven by vengeance, and Lila, aching for redemption. One night, as the camp braced for battle, Caleb found me alone by the river. "I should have turned you in," he said, his voice raw. "But I can't." He stepped closer, his hand cupping my face, and I saw the man who'd loved Abigail, the man who'd lost everything. "I love you, Lila," he said, and my world shattered. I wanted to tell him I wasn't her, that I was Elias, that I hated him. But I didn't. Instead, I kissed him, my lips trembling against his, a moment of weakness that felt like truth. When I pulled away, his eyes were wet, and I knew I'd broken us both. The kiss lingered, a wound and a promise, as Caleb's confession burned in my ears. I loved him, too, not as Lila, but as Elias, the man who'd lost everything and found something impossible in his enemy's arms. But dawn was breaking, and with it, the Union's final strike, orchestrated by my own hand. I pulled away, my heart a battlefield of its own, and whispered, "Forgive me." Caleb's eyes searched mine, confused, but there was no time to explain. The first cannon roared, shaking the earth, and the camp erupted into chaos. I fled to my tent, shedding Lila's dress for a soldier's uniform I'd stolen weeks ago. Elias was reborn, not as a concubine, but as the Marquis, ready to end this. The battle was merciless. Union forces swept through the camp, their victory assured by my intelligence. I fought among them, my sword flashing, my eyes scanning for Caleb. I found him in the heart of the fray, bloodied but unyielding, his men falling around him. Our eyes met across the battlefield, and I saw the moment he realized the truth, not Lila, but someone else, someone who'd betrayed him. He charged, his sword raised, but I didn't fight back. I dropped my weapon, my voice breaking as I shouted, "Caleb, it's me, Elias Thornton. Abigail's brother. His blade froze midair, his face collapsing into shock and grief. No, he whispered, the locket falling from his hand into the mud. It can't be. The battle raged around us, but we were a still point in the storm. I loved her, he said, tears streaming down his face. I didn't know she was in that house. I believed him, and that belief broke me. I stepped closer, my voice steady despite the chaos. I know. And I love you. The words were a confession, a release, the truth I'd fought for months. He dropped his sword, his hands shaking, and for a moment, I thought we could escape this together. But a Union soldier, mistaking him for a threat, fired. Caleb fell, blood pooling beneath him, his eyes locked on mine. Elias, he whispered, and then he was gone. I sank to my knees, cradling him, my disguise meaningless now. The war ended that day, the Confederacy broken, but my victory was hollow. I buried Abigail's locket with him, a symbol of the love we'd both lost. As I walked away from the battlefield, Elias and Lila merged into Oni Man Reborn, not in vengeance, but in forgiveness. Years later, I rebuilt Willow Creek, not as a Marquis, but as a man who'd learned to love through hate. Caleb's memory haunted me, a reminder that even in war, humanity could survive. I wrote our story, not to glorify the pain, but to honor the truth that love, no matter how impossible, could heal even the deepest wounds.